Hello, my name's Della, and I'm a researcher at the University of York who worked on the BASIL study. Today we would like to talk about the study. We are really fortunate to have Karen with us today. Karen delivered the BASIL Behavioural Activation course as a support worker, and we are keen to hear her views on how she found it. In 2020, when the COVID pandemic hit, we were just about to deliver a large-scale trial of a guided self-help intervention for older adults with multiple long-term health conditions and low mood. We had to act extremely quickly to transform it into BASIL, a similar study, but one which could be fully delivered and evaluated entirely remotely, something we had never done before. The support workers received training into the use of the BASIL intervention and delivered it with the aid of a booklet. The booklet looked at ways to help them keep doing the activities they found useful in their life. Where activities had to stop, for example, due to being physically too difficult or because of pandemic restrictions, the BASIL support worker helped them to look at alternative activities which would help them keep the important things they got out of doing those activities in their life. As part of helping participants to access available support, BASIL support workers would help the participant to find out and access services from their GPs, as well as other agencies and groups to help them to maintain their well-being and carry on being able to do the things which were important to them. So, Karen, could you tell me what made you want to become a BASIL support worker?
Sure. At the beginning of the BASIL support worker, at the beginning of BASIL, I was actually working in a talking therapy service in Yorkshire. And so I was already working with people, older people who were contacting the service with difficulties with depression and anxiety. But one of the things that I really felt was lacking was we didn't really seem to have any interventions that really were tailored towards their needs. So although we used behavioural activation, it was in a very general way, and quite a lot of the people who were using behavioural activation were a lot younger. So their situation was different, their experiences were different. So I was really interested in finding out about an intervention that could potentially help older people. So that was a big draw for me. I think at the same time, as you mentioned, Della, we were going into the COVID lockdowns, and I was really aware that, people were struggling, older people were needing to shield, and to me it felt really important to be able to do something that could help people who are, facing a really difficult time in their lives.
Okay, so it sounded like it was the fact that BASIL was tailored towards the needs of the older adults, particularly during the pandemic, was something that attracted you to taking part. Were there any personal benefits from you for taking part? And if so, what were they?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as I've mentioned, being able to feel that I was helping in some way was really important. We as practitioners in a talking therapy service, we were sort of struggling to accommodate what was happening around us. We had our own anxieties and concerns about our own lives as well. So being able to focus on something that was potentially helping somebody else, I found was really that really helped me. I think at a time when I felt I was struggling a little bit. I was also interested in developing my skills. So as I've mentioned, I've used behavioural activation as part of my day-to-day work. But I really was interested in how can we take this intervention and tailor it for the needs of a particular group of individuals who I felt that, there weren't so many services available for them. So it was about improving my skill set and being able to reach more people and support them more effectively.
Oh, so that's really interesting. As you say, it was about kind of improving your skill set, but you found that actually focusing on this kind of helped you to cope with, some of the strains that we're kind of all under at the time of the pandemic. Can you tell me a bit about how you found the experience of actually delivering the intervention?
Yeah, sure. I mean, First of all, I want to say that I think the training and the support I got from the research team was amazing. We had some brilliant training in advance, and we were really well supported throughout the time that we were delivering the intervention. So there's regular contact with the research teams. I had a weekly supervision session with one of the research team. The team also put on webinars regularly for the BASIL support workers, which meant that we had an opportunity to chat with other support workers and learn about their practice and their experiences, do problem solving together, find out how the research project was actually progressing as well. So those things are really good. The materials that we used in the research were also really good. So we had a very comprehensive participant workbook that we were using. So our participants had a copy of that at home, and we had a copy ourselves. So I think that was really well thought out, and it was a really nicely produced booklet with lots of case studies and photographs, and it's to use it in as a working document, a useful document. So I think that was all really, really positive. The research team were absolutely great around the logistics as well, so linking BASIL support workers up with research participants. So just making the whole process really easy, and it was a very, very positive experience.
Oh, that's really good to know, Karen. And it sounds like there was lots of different avenues that you got support from different people. You've already mentioned this a little bit, but I wondered whether you wanted to say any more on kind of increasing in the knowledge that you gained, that you could translate into other areas from working on BASIL.
Yeah, sure. So the intervention was tailored specifically towards the needs of older individuals. So there was an opportunity really there to sort of think about using behavioural activation in a much more focused way with a particular, people of retirement age, but also people who had other long-term physical health conditions as well. So it was really about thinking about how can we help and support people to be more active, but within the constraints of maybe physical disabilities or physical restrictions, as well as just thinking about their mental well-being. So I think that bringing together the physical and the mental well-being was really important to me. And I felt that my knowledge of a person's own perspective of living with a physical health condition, I think it helped me to improve my insight and understanding of what they might be going through. And in that way, it kind of informed how I then worked with other people who had physical and physical health restrictions, as well as struggling a little bit with their mood and feeling isolated.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Yeah, because everybody who came into the study did have long-term physical health conditions. So as you say, it kind of helped you with those knowledge around that area. We delivered the intervention over the telephone. So how did you find that, Karen?
From my perspective, that was okay. As I said, I was working in a talking therapy service at the time, and using the telephone was one of the ways that we delivered our interventions with our service users anyway. So sometimes people would come into the service and have a face-to-face session. Other times they would be using remote access video conferencing, but a lot of people chose to have their treatment using the telephone. So from my perspective, that was okay. That felt quite familiar. I think, sort of talking to the people that I was working with, the participants in BASIL, a lot of the participants really enjoyed using the telephone. They found it conferred lots of advantages. They're used to talking to people on the telephone, so that in itself wasn't a difficulty for them. One or two people mentioned that it would have been harder to have had the sessions over a video call, because it would have meant getting to grips with some new technology, or maybe it was a case of they didn't have the internet at home, so that would have been difficult for them. People said that although they couldn't see me, they liked talking to me. I sounded like a friendly voice on the end of the phone, and also it was, taking into consideration that it was very difficult for people to get out and about. It was a really efficient way of being able to access treatment. There were some challenges, of course. In terms of using the workbook, for instance, I couldn't see what people were doing. They couldn't see what I was doing. So, we had some quite interesting conversations around trying to find the right page in the booklet to sort of guiding people through that. Obviously, I couldn't see how they were using the booklet as well. So I was quite reliant on them being able to explain what they were doing. Also, one of the things that's quite important when you're working with an individual with depression is being able to pick up on things like body language and just seeing how people look. 'Cause sometimes you can get clues about a person's state of mind just by looking at them. Obviously, you don't get that, so you need to listen very carefully to a person's tone of voice. And then just some practical considerations around, giving people time to think about things and not talking over one another. But by and by, I think using the telephone was a really efficient way to go about delivering the intervention, and I think it worked really well.
That's really good to know that, as you say, you think it worked really well. And it sounds like you were able to use the booklet because you both had one, and just making sure that you were on the same page. The intervention had several different elements to it, and it could be used flexibly in the way that seemed to fit the participant best. Were there any particular elements of the intervention that you felt really worked well for the participants?
Yeah, I think there's several elements to the intervention that I think really make a big difference. I think, first of all, making that link between what you're doing and how you're feeling is really important. I think, people don't necessarily, we don't tend to be introspective about those things. So we get on with our lives and do things and don't necessarily see that there's a link between what we're doing and how we're feeling. And that sometimes something that seems like it's positive and helpful maybe isn't in the longer term. So if people, for instance, have stopped doing things because they're not feeling great, then it gives them more time to be reflective about their situation, and that can kind of affect their mood. It can cut them off from doing things that are important to them or from social contact. So I think making that link was really important, and it actually encouraged people to want to do a little bit more or get back to doing something. And as part of that, I think we used an approach called the outside-in approach, which was, rather than waiting till you feel better to start doing things again, it's go ahead and plan to do those things, having made that link between how you're feeling and what you're doing, because understanding that then can help you to start to recover or start to feel better in yourself, help you to sort of maintain how you're feeling and stop you from starting to feel worse about things. So I think that was really important.
Yeah, I think, as you say, it's turning it on its head, isn't it? Rather than waiting to feel better to do something, doing something to feel better.
Right, yeah.
was something that people used, and they found that seemed to help them. There was other things, such as kind of breaking things down, or helping people to access services. Were those things something that you particularly used and found useful with the participants?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly in terms of breaking things down, quite often people had ideas about things that they would maybe want to do or get back to doing, but somehow those things seemed really insurmountable, sort of a big mountain to climb, and that would be quite off-putting. So people wouldn't try because they felt that it was something they couldn't achieve. So if we could sort of work on looking at what it was that the person wanted to do and sort of trying to break it down into its constituent parts, we could maybe find a way to take some small steps towards achieving a bigger goal. So, if it was a case of somebody, for instance, felt that they wanted to tidy their garden, for instance, if it got overgrown, then rather than thinking about it as a big job, get on top of the garden, we would look at sort of just starting with some small things. So maybe thinking about just checking the lawnmower, is it working okay? Doing a little bit of weeding, or maybe tidying up some pots or something, just to make a start, and then, sort of being able to move forward from that. So definitely breaking things down into smaller parts was really useful. We also looked at, how people were using health services, and bearing in mind that people already had physical health problems and were probably under the care of their GP surgery or maybe seeing a specialist. And one of the things that I did find when I was working with people was how guilty they felt about, trying to look after their physical health. Almost everyone was said, I don't want to bother the doctors. I don't want to bother the specialists or the nurses. They're really busy with COVID. They're struggling under the strain. It doesn't seem right that I should be, bothering them with my stuff. So we looked at that and, thought about how important it was to look after your physical well-being. And if you neglect things, that could be storing up more problems for the future. So, empowering people to start a conversation with their GP or their specialist about maybe outstanding routine appointments, or having a conversation about a symptom that was maybe bothering them at the time, I felt was really important. I mean, there were times when I could contact the GP surgery on the person's behalf, but wherever possible, we tried to work it so that the person initiated that contact themselves, so that they were empowered to start to do that for themselves again.
Yeah, so as you say, that encouragement to actually try and resume things with the people who were looking after their health was something that seemed to be useful. We mentioned right at the start, and you've mentioned it yourself, about the intervention being delivered during the pandemic. Do you feel that there were any particular challenges or indeed benefits to it being delivered at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was a very timely intervention. When I started working with people, older people had been shielding for quite some time. And isolation was a really big problem for people, particularly in terms of being cut off from their families and their friends, and just being able to get out and live a normal life, just doing things like going to the hairdressers, the barbers, that kind of thing. I think people who participated in the study really welcomed some contact from somebody, this regular weekly contact with somebody, to talk about what was really a very practical intervention. So what practical things can I do to help me to sort of cope with being in a situation where I'm shielding and I can't live my normal life, and my world has shrunk down to sort of my own home and my own garden. So I think that was very timely, and it was about looking at things that people could do at home to fill their time, to keep a focus on things, to have a purpose. And at the same time, we were going from a stage where people were shielding to when the shielding restrictions were being lifted and people were able to start getting out and about again. But that in itself came with a lot of worries and anxieties. People were quite nervous about going back out again. They felt very vulnerable, very unsafe. So being able to think about how they could set goals and how they could manage how they were feeling, so that they were encouraged to start picking up again on activities that were outside the home, but doing it in a very safe way, in a way that they felt that they had control over what was happening and they could keep themselves safe. So I think that was really important as well. So I think the intervention was very timely.
So it sounds like that there were challenges about people not being able to get out, but then a bit later on there were challenges about people feeling confident and how they were going to start getting
resuming
out
that
again.
normal life again.
Yeah. Okay. Were there any particular elements of the intervention which didn't seem useful, maybe to particular participants or even in general?
I think the intervention was very well thought out, and I don't think there would be anything that I would pick upon that I would say generally wasn't useful. I think it was all useful. I think individual people found some parts of the intervention more useful than the others. So I think, interestingly, goal setting was something that some people didn't necessarily identify with, in that they couldn't or didn't want to set big goals. They were finding it quite hard to see things into the future because of the uncertainty of the situation. But we did use goal setting as part of breaking tasks down. So we used it as you know, sort of an opportunity to take steps towards working on something a bit bigger. But they didn't necessarily see goal setting itself as something that was necessarily useful, which rather surprised me, because that was something that we used in the talking therapies service a lot. But I guess it was the situation, I think, the uncertainty of the future that made it difficult for people to think about setting longer term goals.
Right.
Because they just weren't sure.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any particular examples that you can think of how the intervention helped individual participants?
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking about a couple of the people that I worked with. For one lady, it was about how could she usefully use her time when she was shielding. So we tried to turn a restriction into an opportunity. So rather than saying, I can't go out, and this particular lady had a very busy life outside the home and really felt the lack of that. So we started to sort of reframe everything, thinking about what are all the things that you would like to do at home? What are all the things that you've always said, oh, I can't do that, I haven't got time for that because of all my things that I'm doing outside the home. We found that quite useful. So she went through some big tidying up exercises. There was she said, "Oh, I've got clothes that I want to sort out and to decide what I want to keep, what I want to send to the charity shop." So we use that as an opportunity to let's focus on those tasks that normally you wouldn't have time to do. And she enjoyed the process. And by the time we'd finished, she had some bags of things ready to go to the charity shop when the opportunity came round. And so she found that quite useful. And she felt like she was doing something practical. So that was very helpful. Another person that I worked with was a gentleman with arthritis who he'd been a real DIYer. So he'd done lots of things to help his family. So once he was retired and they were working and they didn't have time, and as his grandchildren got their own homes, he was popping around doing DIY and decorating for them. But because of his, his arthritis, he couldn't do a lot of these things anymore. So we used that time as an opportunity for him to become a teacher, to teach his skills, particularly to his grandchildren. So as the shielding lifted and he was able to get out and about again, he actually started going and spending some time with his grandchildren, teaching them how to wallpaper. So it was just about, the sessions were an opportunity to think about how he could help them and then making a plan for what he was going to do and what skills he was going to teach them.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds brilliant that he was able to find some way of still being able to help in some way, even if he wasn't doing it individually himself. Okay. That's been really, really interesting, Karen. I suppose what we wanted to come to just as we come to the end is if you've got kind of any thoughts on how the BASIL intervention would be embedded in practice, or whether there are any particular challenges that you feel there might be if people were trying to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important as a support worker is the support that you get. So if you're working with people with depression, then there can be a risk that person, may be a risk of self-harming or holding, suicidal thoughts. So it's making sure that if you're working with somebody for who that might be a problem, that there's a mechanism for ensuring that person gets timely support to help keep them safe and to look after them. And also as a support worker, it's really important that you receive support. Obviously, you're working with people who are struggling with their mood, and sometimes you might get an element of, I guess, transference where those feelings are sort of transferred to you, and you're carrying a lot of thoughts about people who are struggling with their well-being. So receiving support from a supervisor yourself, somebody with a mental health background is really important. So I guess moving forwards, if this intervention was to be embedded into clinical practice, it's just thinking about how maybe could BASIL support workers who might, for instance, be working in, say, the charity sector, how would they access that kind of supervision and support themselves, and just making sure that there was a care pathway for any individual who might be identified as being at risk to get timely support.
Right, okay, so having the people in place, but also the mechanisms and the pathways for them for them to access support. Well, that's everything that I really wanted to ask you, Karen. Is there anything else you wanted to add at all?
No, just really, I think, my experience of working on BASIL was very positive. I thought the intervention worked really well. The feedback that I got from the people that I worked with was that they enjoyed using the workbooklet. They enjoyed doing behavioural activation, and they could see the benefits of it. So, I think it's a wonderful intervention, and I really hope that it's taken up into clinical practice and that more people have the opportunity to use it.
Thanks, Karen. That's been brilliant. It's been great talking to you, and thank you to everybody for listening.
Thank you.